40% of millennials okay with limiting speech offensive to minorities, reports the Pew Poll Research Center on November 20th, 2015. The headline refers to millennials in America specifically. This is something that I touched upon in a previous video but did not go into in great detail. That's what we're going to do in this video. While there is no universal agreement on exactly when a given generation begins and ends, millennials, also known as Generation Y, includes people born about 1980 to about the mid-1990s according to some, or the early 2000s according to others. As of the current year, this is 2017, this would include people who are in their teens to people who are about age 37. For the purpose of this poll, Pew defines millennials as people being between 18 and 34. Quote, American millennials are far more likely than older generations to say that governments should be able to prevent people from saying offensive statements about minority groups, unquote. I knew that millennials in America are generally more opposed to freedom of speech than previous American generations, but I was still shocked that a Pew poll would show such a high percentage, 40%. So that's 40% of millennials against freedom of speech. I was even more shocked to read that, according to the Pew Poll Research Center, 27% of Generation Xers were in favor of the government preventing people from such speech. In other words, 27% of Generation Xers are against freedom of speech. I would have guesstimated a far lower figure. Generation X is generally considered to include people born from the mid-1960s to the late 70s or early 80s. This would be people from about the age of 34 to about the age of 52. Pew defines Generation X as people between 35 and 50. And this would be my generation, I'm not very proud to say. Now, Generation X has its faults. We tend to be too cynical, too negative, pessimistic, apathetic, etc., and we have good qualities. For example, at least it seems to me, we're the first generation to widely reject homophobia, and we are also very anti-authoritarian and very left-wing in general. As anti-authoritarians, we generally do not want the government to enforce political correctness or quote-unquote social justice, unlike millennials. It's basically the difference between people running to mommy and daddy or a teacher to deal with their issues with other kids or just dealing with their issues with other kids. So 27% is higher than what some might expect. Shame on you, Generation X. 27% of the baby boomer generation, at least according to the Pew polls, 24% are in favor of such limits on freedom of speech. Again, I am shocked. The baby boomer generation roughly includes people born from about 1946 to about 1960. This includes people of about age 53 to about age 71. For this poll, Pew is defining boomers as people between 51 and 69. Again, this is as of the current year, 2017. Now, it shouldn't be very surprising that baby boomers are actually more in favor of freedom of speech than Generation Xers and millennials, being that they had to fight for equal rights for women, they had to fight to stop a very unjust and bloody war, and they lived in a time period where the establishment really wanted to silence them. This is the civil rights generation, of course, but 24%, that's pretty darn high. That's only 3% away from Generation Xers. The silent generation includes, roughly speaking, people born from the mid to late 1920s to the early to mid 1940s. So this includes people from about the age of 72 to about the age of 92. Pew defines the silent generation as people between 70 and 87. According to the Pew Poll Research Center, 12% of the silent generation are in favor of such limits on freedom of speech. The silent generation, of course, is the generation that saw the rise of authoritarian ideologies and regimes. Dictatorships, fascism, totalitarianism, Bolshevism, Stalinism, communism, imperialism, Nazism, etc. So it seems natural that they would be more opposed to authoritarianism than other generations. But 12%? That's still far too high. Again, if these polls are accurate, fuck you to any one of you who are against freedom of speech. Compared to the world, however, the USA is not so bad. According to Pew, out of the 38 nations surveyed, the USA is still the least likely to support the government limiting freedom of speech of any kind. 2/3 of Americans want no limits to even speech that is offensive to minorities, whereas the average of the other 38 nations polled is about 35%. The Pew poll also claims that fewer white Americans, that is 23%, are in favor of such limits to freedom of speech than non-whites, 38%. American women in general are about 33% against freedom of speech, and American men about 23% against freedom of speech. Also, according to these Pew polls, 35% of Democrats are in favor of such limits compared to about 18% of Republicans. Well, fuck you Republicans, and fuck you Democrats. Also, according to these polls, Americans with less education, that is high school diploma or less, are more likely to be against freedom of speech than Americans with higher education, that is college or more. This makes sense, of course, because the more that you know about history, the more that you realize how important freedom of speech is. This Pew poll was also taken in Germany, Italy, Poland, France, Spain, and the UK, and according to the polls, results in Europe vary from nation to nation, but on average, 49% of people polled in Germany, Italy, Poland, France, Spain, and the UK want limits to such speech. That's even more than American millennials. The Pew Research Center suggests that this has much to do with the very high racial tensions in Europe related to the intense pressures involved in the migrant crisis. To be fair, the difference varies considerably from about 38% of people in the UK against freedom of speech to about 70% of people in Germany against freedom of speech. As in the USA, millennials in the UK are more likely to want the government to enact such limits on freedom of speech than older generations. However, the opposite is true in Germany and Spain, according to their poll. Now let's discuss another report by the Pew Research Center. Global support for principle of free expression, but opposition to some forms of speech. Americans especially likely to embrace individual liberties. This Pew Research Center survey was conducted in 38 nations among 40,786 respondents from April 5th to May 21st, 2015. And as you can see, out of the nations that they polled globally, the United States is actually still more on average in favor of freedom of expression than other nations. According to this poll, America is at 71% in favor of freedom of speech as opposed to 69% for Latin America, 65% for Europe, 50% for Asia and the Pacific, 46% for Africa, and 43% for the Middle East. That's a global median of 56%. So America is 15% more likely to be in favor of freedom of speech than the global median. However, look at the figures for the question of can the media report the news. According to these polls, 67% of Americans say yes, the news should be able to report the news. Who the fuck are the other 23%, and why the fuck do they think the news should not be able to report the news? Compare this to Latin America, 71%. So more people, apparently in Latin America, are actually in favor of the news being able to report the news than people in America. What the fuck? And here's the figures for the question involving the internet. As the report states, quote, although many observers have documented a global decline in democratic rights in recent years, people around the world nonetheless embrace fundamental democratic values, including free expression. A new Pew Research Center survey finds that majorities in nearly all 38 nations polled say it is at least somewhat important to live in a country with free speech, a free press, and freedom on the internet. The United States stands out for its especially strong opposition to government censorship, as do countries in Latin America and Europe, particularly Argentina, Germany, Spain, and Chile. Majorities in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East also tend to oppose censorship, albeit with much less intensity. Indonesians, Palestinians, Burkinabe, and Vietnamese are among the least likely to say that free expression is very important. While free expression is popular around the globe, other democratic rights are even more widely embraced. In Western and non-Western nations throughout the global North and South, majorities want freedom of religion, gender equality, and honest, competitive elections. Yet the strength of commitment to individual liberties also varies. Americans are amongst the strongest supporters of these freedoms. Meanwhile, Europeans are especially likely to want gender equality and competitive elections, but somewhat less likely than others to prioritize religious freedom. The right to worship freely is most popular in sub-Saharan Africa. Across all regions, people who say religion is very important in their lives are more likely to value religious freedom. Let's take a look at this chart called Americans More Supportive of All Forms of Free Expression Than Others Worldwide. As the report says, quote, even though broad democratic values are popular, people in different parts of the world have different ways of conceptualizing individual rights and the parameters of free expression. Publics tend to support free speech in principle, but they also want limitations on certain types of speech. While a global median of 80% believe people should be allowed to freely criticize government policies, only 35% think that they should be allowed to make public statements that are offensive to minority groups. Even fewer support allowing sexually explicit statements or calls for violent protests. Now let's cut through the bullshit here. If you are against speech that is offensive to some people, you are against freedom of speech, period. Some people are trying to redefine certain speech as being non-speech. In other words, hate speech is not speech. No. Hate speech is speech. If you disagree with this, then you disagree with the definitions of these words. By definition, if you are against some speech, you are against freedom of speech. That's just how reality works, folks. You can redefine things all you want, it's not going to change reality. 2 plus 2 does in fact equal 4, no matter what you think. You can say that 2 plus 2 equals 5, you can believe it all you want, you can convince every human on Earth, and you would still be incorrect. I have news for you. Make-believe does not make things real. Unlike what Disney told you, wishing upon a star does not change reality. If you think your beliefs determine reality, do me a favor. Go to the top of a tall building, believe you can fly, and jump off. Getting back to the article. Quote, Americans, however, are more willing than the rest of the world to tolerate these forms of speech. Large majorities in the U.S. think that people should be able to say things that are offensive to minority groups or religious beliefs. About half, 52%, say this about sexually explicit statements, and more than 4 in 10, 44%, think calls for violent protests should be allowed. Note that in the USA, according to constitutional law, calls for violence are actually not protected speech. Things like yelling fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire is illegal, as is calling for people to be hurt. In other words, you cannot say, hey, let's go out there and lynch somebody. Now, I'm not going to cover everything in this report. In fact, it goes on for another 6.5 pages longer. So I'm going to put a link in the description to this video to this poll and the other poll so you can read it all yourself. It's too bad that the Pew Research Center doesn't actually also line up the IQs of these people with their poll results, although that would be impractical, of course. It takes a lot of research to determine IQ levels. However, I do think such information would be fascinating, because I think if you were to line such information up, you would see that the less intelligent a person is, the more likely it is that they would be against freedom of speech. And so if you're against freedoms, know this. Intelligent people disagree with you, and stupid people agree with you. Now, how does that feel? If you're one of these people, please do us all a favor and go... Alright, just kidding. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. I'm not serious. Yes, I am. No, I'm just kidding. Kill yourself? No, just kidding. Just kidding. Don't kill yourself. Do it. Kill yourself. Kill yourself, kill yourself. Why don't you kill yourself? Don't rely on no one else, and then all kill yourself. Kill yourself, kill yourself. Why don't you kill yourself? Don't rely on no one else, and then all kill yourself now. Thanks for watching, folks. Please subscribe to my channel, and please make sure you click that little bell icon, otherwise you'll never know when I have a new video out. Thank you to my executive producer, Tabitha, whom I love very much. Ah, yes, I almost forgot. Also, join Minds.com now, fast. Hurry up. Minds.com is going to replace Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, because all three of those are full of shit and getting worse by the week. Minds.com refuses to censor things or to put you in jail for saying something offensive or anything like that. They don't have a bunch of advertisements like those other sites. And they're committed to freedom of speech. Links to all the sources used in this video are below. All the music in this video is by myself, Stormtroopers of Death, and Fishbone, whose song I'm about to play. Back in the early 90s, the band Fishbone put out the song Fight the Youth. I didn't quite understand who they were talking to back then, but whatever the case may be, I think the song is applicable to today's millennials, the 40% who are against freedom of speech, for example. So if you are of the 40%, the following song by Fishbone is dedicated to you, morons. Every time I feel the hatred that they go into, makes me wonder if the quest for people want that sunshine. Not afraid to wake the hopeless night. I must fight. I could never lose. I know my cross I didn't love. Take a look around. When I'm hiding in my heart, take a positive. But the great is one. Hero. See that find the truth. This would pass your mind. You gotta find the truth. Sad people say goodbye. Filled with anger, make the choices for a future where all nightmares come true. Choose to fight, then you to fight, but choose to fight for justice.